Welcome to the fifth installment of the 2025 Phosphorescence Contemporary Poetry Series, produced by the Emily Dickinson Museum. Now in its fifth year, this series brings you some exciting contemporary poets. We're so happy to know these three who will be sharing their work with us this afternoon and evening. Um, and all of the poets in our series have caught the spark of Emily Dickinson's own phosphorescent light, and we'll talk about Dickinson as well during our time together. My name is Scout Turkel. I'm a poet. I'm also a recent tour guide of 3 years at the Emily Dickinson Museum. And I'm so glad to be here tonight with you all and to celebrate these three extraordinary poets. Before I introduce them, I'm just going to read out two reminders for those of us watching on Zoom so that we can all thoroughly enjoy the program and interact with each other in an effective, enjoyable way. First, we encourage you to use the chat. I love seeing people already doing so. Um, Feel free to share affirmations and words of encouragement for tonight's poets. Um, and if you haven't, do tell us where you're listening from. We love to know. And second, tonight's reading will be followed by a brief Q&A, at which point I will be looking for your questions in the typed Q&A feature on Zoom so that we can pose them to tonight's poets. You should be able to find this in your Zoom toolbar, and you can place questions there at any time during the reading. It doesn't have to be just at the end. Great. And with that, I'm going to introduce tonight's readers in order of appearance. Starting us off is the wonderful Lee Horikoshi Roripaugh. She, they, is a biracial Nisei and the author of 5 volumes of poetry, most recently Tsunami versus the Fukushima 50, which was named a Best Book of 2019 by the New York Public Library, selected as a poetry finalist in the 2020 Lambda Literary Awards, cited as a Society of Midland Authors 2020 honoree in poetry, and was named one of the 50 must-read poetry collections in 2019 by Book Riot. Her collection of fiction, Reveal Codes, was selected as winner of the Moon City Press Short Fiction Award and published by Moon City Press in late 2023. And their chapbook, String of Beads, a winner of the Diode Editions chapbook competition, was released from Diode Press in 2023. She was named winner of the Association of Asian American Studies Book Award in Poetry Prose for 2004 and a 1998 winner of the National Poetry Series. The South Dakota State Poet Laureate from 2015 to 2019, Roripaugh is a professor of English at the University of South Dakota, where they serve as editor-in-chief of South Dakota Review. Thank you so much for joining us, Lee. Our second reader of the night will be Cathy Lynn Che, is a writer and multidisciplinary artist. She is the author of Becoming Ghost, Split, and co-author with Kyle Lucio Wu of the children's book An Asian American A to Z, A Children's Guide to Our History. She is working on a creative nonfiction manuscript on her parents' experiences as refugees who played extras on Apocalypse Now. Her video installation, Apocalypse, is an open call commission with the Shed NY, and her documentary short, We Were the Scenery, is premiering at Sundance in 2025. And our third and final reader of the night, Monica Ong, is a visual poet and the author of Silent Anatomies. A graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design, Ong brings a designer's eye to experimental writing with her hybrid image poems and installations that surface hidden narratives of women and diaspora. Her poetry can be found in Scientific American, Control V, and Poetry Magazine, and in the anthology A Mouth Holds Many Things, a D-Canon hybrid literary collection. Ong's most recent series of astronomy-inspired visual poetry was exhibited at the Poetry Foundation and is the basis of her new book, Planetaria. You can find her fine press visual poetry editions and literary art objects in over 50 distinguished institutional collections worldwide, including Amherst College. In 2024, Ong was named a United States Artist Fellow in Writing. Thank you to all three of these wonderful poets and artists for joining us. And with that, it's time for some poetry. And Lee, can I invite you to begin tonight's readings?
Thank you so much, Scout, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this wonderful reading series in collaboration with the Emily Dickinson Museum. It's such a delight for me to be reading with Cathy and Monica, both of whom are poets that I hold in the highest admiration. And I'm also particularly moved and also charmed by the ways in which our reading tonight feels as if it's a little bit in conversation with the legacy of Emily Dickinson. I'm going to open with two poems from my current manuscript titled Kaze no Denwa, which is Japanese for the wind phone, inspired by the disconnected rotary dial phone set up in a phone booth in Otsuchi, Japan, where survivors of the tsunami and Fukushima disaster in Japan made pilgrimages to speak to their dead. Some of the poems in this manuscript are direct address phone calls or poem calls on the wind. And I would like to open with one of these. To my mother's dementia, Kaze no Denwa. How do I admit I'm almost glad of it? The way it scraped off those flash storms of rage. I grew delicately feathered Luna moth antenna to fine tune your emotional weather. Sometimes a barometric shift in the house's atmosphere, a tight quickening, some hard dark shadow flickering glossy as obsidian, pulled down like a nightshade behind your irises. But sometimes you struck with no warning at all, rattlesnaked fang of lightning, incinerating my moon-pale wings to crumpled cinder and ash. Now your memory resets itself every night, a button clearing the trip odometer back to zero. Dim absinthe fizz of radium green glow from the dashboard, half-lifing a midnight rollover from omega to alpha to omega. I remember when you told me, maybe I was 3, I was intellectually disabled, like the boy across the street, said you'd help me pass for normal so no one would know, but only if I swore to obey you and only you forever. Now your memory thins around and around like the shiny obsessive lassos of a goldfish gold banding the narrow perimeters of its too small bowl. Coming home from school, maybe I was 15. You were waiting for me just inside the front door. Accused me of stealing a can of corned beef hash from the canned goods stashed in the basement, then beat me in the face with your shoe. How do I admit I'm almost glad of it? That I'd always pined for you like an unrequited love, though I was never beautiful enough for you. Your tinned bright laugh, shrapnelled flecks of steel to hide your anger when people used to say we looked like one another. But now we compare our same dimpled hands, the thick feathering of eyebrows with the same crooked wing, bird winging over our left eye, our uneven cheekbones making one half of our face rounder than the other. One side a full moon, the other side a shyer kind of moon. How can I admit I'm almost glad of it when you no longer recognize yourself in photographs, the mirror becoming stranger until one day, will it be soon? You'll look in my face, once again seeing nothing of yourself reflected in it, and, unsure of all that you were and all that you are, ask me, who are you? The most recent wind phone poems I've been writing have been in 5 parts, circulating associationally and linguistically around a single word or concept. And so I've been thinking of these poems as mappings. And I wanted to also set these mappings in dialogue with an actual ancient Japanese map called Jishin no Ben. And Jishin no Ben represents an Ouroboros, a dragon eating its own tail. And it circles around a geographical area in Japan as was meant to serve as a visual explanation and also a warning for the earthquakes and tsunamis that had occurred there. So this poem is one of the mappings, and it's called Obad, which is a traditional poem of farewell. Obad, a mapping, Jishin no Ben. 1. You dream you've been assigned to care for a pangolin, spiny anteater, artichoke of gold with bright leaves for scales. You love the way it spirals into an artful coil at the bottom of your bed, how it walks upright on its hind feet, its pink and whip-like spaghetti noodle of a tongue. But then its scales start to fall away, one by one by one, before it simply vanishes, going, going, gone. 2. Goodbye to the sense of self as scapegoat, black sheep, troublemaker, and bad seed. Goodbye to being the thorn that abrades the side, a stinging burr embedded beneath the saddle. Goodbye to being the one who never fails to disappoint, the swallower of bile, the expired ordnance, the detonation chamber. When she no longer recognizes you, who will you be? How will you recognize yourself in the shattering mirror of her face? 3. Leaving Las Vegas, New Mexico, you pass the bear sleeping on the highway. A round brown mound, cheek pressed to asphalt, claw partially open, trucks whizzing by. By the time you realize the bear isn't sleeping, it's disappeared in your rear view. The ghost malingering, hulky and gloomy, depressed by the sequined mariachi in Pueblo, uncharmed by the mountain in Alamosa that looks like a face, upturned, smoking, French inhaling clouds. 4. Why is it so hard to know when the last time is the last time? Your beautiful tortoiseshell cat, who became depressed, starved herself to a skeleton the summer you spent caring for your parents. Your father confessing he'd never forgive you for not letting him drive after the stroke, after the dementia, saying we don't want to see you before hanging up the phone. The bewildered ghosts of people stacked in refrigerated trucks. Did any of them know the last time was the last time? 5. A disconnected wind phone in a hilltop garden overlooking the ocean in Otsuchi, Japan, where tsunami survivors come to talk to their dead. The rotary dial phone, cracked receiver mended with masking tape in your parents' kitchen, your father's ashes resting in his chair at the table. 1 year, you were in love with fog, its chilled mists, sinuous vapors, the delirium of both presence and absence. How you kept obsessively searching for signs, secret messages in your spam filter. And because I can feel the light shifting and late summer starting to round the corner into autumn, I'd like to finish up with a poem from my third book, On the Cusp of a Dangerous Year, titled Utsuroi, which is a Japanese word conveying the ways in which beauty deepens or can be more deeply felt when one knows that it is fleeting or evanescent. Utsuroi. Morning light sifts through the window later, more tentatively. It takes its time pooling and accumulating in hot, buttery squares on the floor where the cats love to dip and roll themselves as if they were succulent pieces of lobster. Night comes shuddering down more quickly. The band of light that wraps around each day like a wide, bright ribbon is shrinking. The way a favorite shirt shrinks in the dryer, leaving the day's wrists and hips uncovered. A red-headed woodpecker runs up, then down a wooden column on my front porch with splayed, agile feet. Periodically, it stops to tap, head a thrumming, shiny blur like a sewing machine bobbin. The cats nudge the curtains aside with their heads and stare. In the evening, lacy insects with bodies the color of green apples quiver around the windows, a shiver of filigree drawn to the light inside. Things quicken. The geraniums and dahlias burn their colors into the air more brightly. Birds hurry in harried, twittering conferences, and I think reckless thoughts. Things quicken. Why do I always love the light the most, only at the moment of its leaving? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lee. That was beautiful. And thank you so much to our wonderful audience in the chat for engaging with each other and with our poets in this poetry. Um, I'd love to welcome Cathy to unmute and share some work with us.
Thank you, Scout, and thank you, Lee, for that beautiful reading. Thank you so much to the audience. I can feel the attention. I don't know in the recording if people will see the hearts floating up, but I feel it, and in future audiences will get to feel that too. So thank you. I am going to do some screen sharing. As you heard in my bio, my parents were Vietnam War refugees, and they ended up being used as extras in the filming of Apocalypse Now, and they were recruited from the refugee camp when they did that. And this has born several projects, a poetry book, which is called Becoming Ghost, uh, a video installation, and a film that's currently touring the film festival circuit. So my poems don't have a direct sense of engagement with Emily very obviously, but I do feel that Emily Dickinson's sense of compression, wondrousness, curiosity, and that hint of darkness that she has is part of my work as well. So she's an important poet to me, and I'm really grateful to be able to share a space with her in spirit, with Lee and Monica in person, with yeah, the audience here as well virtually. It means a lot. I'm setting up my screens variously, so thanks for your patience as I prepare to screen share. So in front of you, oh, just a second. Screen share again. View. Let's see if this will work. View slideshow. It's working. Great. So in front of you, you'll see a scene from the film Apocalypse Now, it came out in 1979. It was filmed in 1976 when my parents were in the refugee camp. It was immediately after the Vietnam War. So what you see in the foreground is a figure named Sergeant Kilgore. He is played by Robert Duvall. He's shirtless. He has a kind of cowboy-ish hat on with an X on the top. And in the background, what people don't always see because they're not foregrounded are a series of bent over small figures on the side of each, on either side of him. And in that group is my parents. So, as well as the other refugees that were recruited from the refugee camp to be in this iconic Vietnam War film. And so, in exploring what it means to center my family's voices when they were used and marginalized or put in the background, I was looking for a form to do a reversal. So, part of that was to start working with collages. So, what you'll see here is an image of my mother and my father, my mother's stepfather, so my step grandfather, and this is their engagement ceremony. And this is laid over that same um, a scene that happens in the background after napalm ostensibly has been dropped on the landscape. So the attempt is to move my family from the background into the foreground visually by doing that. Here's another one where you sort of see the small figures on either side of my father, the refugees on the back in the background, and you'll have my father, and that's myself as a baby, covering up that large figure of Robert Duvall who's in the foreground. So again, taking people from that background and moving them to the foreground, and centering my family story, which I felt like was very absent in this particular telling of the Vietnam War. And this is me and my brother, and doing the same where that figure of Robert Duvall has moved into the background. This is this is a line from Apocalypse Now, a page from the screenplay, written by Francis Ford Coppola, and this is this is a cutout of myself and my older brother, and that's the front yard of our childhood home. Something that you may not be able to read fully because some of the text is cut out to show some of it says Kilgore, pointing to trees, napalm, it should say sun, napalm sun. Nothing else in the world smells like that, crouches down. I love the smell of napalm in the morning. And that's us over that same landscape shot. So I'll stop sharing there and I'll share a poem that I wrote in the Golden Shovel form, which is a form that was invented by Terrence Hayes. And he was using it as a kind of homage to the poet Gwendolyn Brooks, who wrote that poem that's very famous. It begins, "We real cool." And so that was an homage. It's a collaboration. So what he does is he moves each word of that goes down the right side of the page. It says, "We real cool," and fills it in with some of his words as a way to collaborate with her. And in this way, I wanted to think about collaborating with Coppola's script, but moving my parents' words into the middle. So I'm going to show you a golden shovel. So this is a poem written in my mother's voice. Let me see if I can do a full screen. Okay, just missed that. So the line is, I love the smell of napalm. So you'll see on the side, napalm sun, nothing else in the world smells like that. I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Did I see napalm explode? All the time. Napalm flames, their greasy fingers in the air. I wasn't a son drafted into the war, just a daughter to marry off. After Americans arrived, nothing was left of my grandfather's home. What else do you expect when tanks roll in? Translate the word palm. Oh yes, the bombed world. Today I enter my garden, teeming with smells, basil and lemongrass, dragon fruit climbing over the trellis, reptile-like, waxy and succulent. Guava that swells under my watch. Once a South Vietnamese soldier, I knew him around the village, stumbled into our home. War takes everything we love. He was shot by the Viet Cong. I watched the man bleed out into the sheets. It was the fresh smell of death that got me. Flash forward, scene of myself on a film set. I was the Viet Cong. I was the scenery. Napalm explodes up. I heard boom, boom, boom shaking in my fists. Couldn't sleep last night. Who could sleep through a strafing? The sounds echoing boom, boom, boom from that day into this morning. I'm going to stop screen sharing and I'll share two other poems that are in this format. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So just a moment. Okay. Share screen. Okay, this poem is from my grandmother's perspective. Again, it's the same line. I love the smell of napalm. And this is my grandmother's voice, which I'd been interviewing my mother for years, so it's a way of inhabiting their experience. And thank you for being here to do this poetic seance where we bring alive their voices too. So you'll see napalm, sun, nothing else in the world smells like that. I love the smell of napalm in the morning. From the hospital bed, I watch Be nap. Almighty God, why did I give my newborn son to that German convent? Nothing prepared me for the wreck. Who else could take him in? He wailed in the hallway. Be sang to him, but couldn't calm the colic. Hoa, my mother's name, across the world now, or perhaps dead at sea. The room smells of powdered milk. It was like a punishment, how my breast produced not a drop. I was furious that nobody would take the baby in. I was diagnosed theme ew. My body betrayed the love I had for the boy. Some nights, in the chirring of crickets and the smell of the damp patty, I hear the voice of my son speak to me in German. A palm reader predicted that I would suffer. In war, we all suffer the inevitability of this morning. Thank you. And I'm going to, I have 4 poems in this manuscript like this. Okay. And this is finally my last poem. It's going to be in my father's voice. Thank you for being here. I love the smell of napalm. Dow produced napalm in the early days of the war. I was without a son, was losing my daughter. I cradled her for 3 hours, then her nothing heartbeat was a flicker I couldn't keep alive here or elsewhere in my 2 large hands. In the birthing room, I monitored the EKG until it flatlined. My wife in another world, here in Saigon. Her body still smells of unwashed scalp. Nurses told me to lie. I held the secret like a spent match. When my wife woke from the coma, it was her smile that gutted me. She insisted on buying baby clothes from each passing vendor. I couldn't watch her spend her love on a child the hospital had already buried. I remember my daughter's smell, viscous with blood, her head of thick mucus bright hair. Around her seemed a corona. Palm fronds shook outside the window, monsoon pouring in. I hoped her body would stay buried under the mud. I mapped our escape. We'd leave in the morning. We'd leave when the rain halted in the early morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. That was beautiful. As we move to our final reading of the evening, I want to invite everyone who's here with us to use the Q&A function if you so wish on the Zoom to ask questions to our readers. And with that, I would love to invite Monica to unmute and close out our show this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to the Emily Dickinson Museum, especially our hosts, Emily and Scout, for such a warm welcome. I am also truly honored to be part of this constellation of poetry and mutual admiration. And of course, I'm so grateful to all of you for making time to gather in shared wonder. I'm truly delighted to bring you selections from this new collection of visual poetry, Planetaria, which rewrites the sky from a female perspective. In the spirit of celebrating Emily Dickinson's bold spirit, which dared to subvert both literary and social conventions, these poems for this evening honor 3 women scientists whose brilliance also defied the societal norms of their time. Just going to share. This interactive poem takes the form of a Viewmaster reel, as I wanted the reader to inhabit the stance of stargazing that astronomer Caroline Herschel devoted most of her life to. Often described as an unquiet heart, she was born in 1750 as the younger sister of astronomer William Herschel, and she was the first woman to also receive a salary as a scientist and the first woman awarded the gold medal of the Royal Astronomical Society. William Herschel's discoveries would never have happened without Caroline's labor, whether it was watching the sky for new phenomena, feeding her brother while he worked, or carefully transcribing scientific data. She discovered 8 comets of her own and also developed a catalog of nebula and stars. As a visual poem, the text is framed by Herschel's sketches of comet C 1786 P1, which he observed on August 1st in 1786, between the constellations Ursa Major and the Coma Berenices. The poem begins with the inscription on her tombstone. The eyes of her who is glorified were here below turned to the starry heavens. Caroline Herschel, 1750 to 1848. A mother's maid blunted, stunted by typhus. Caroline, I watch you sleep by the cinders, dreams dim in the clouds that thicken in the glass of her gaze. Lace ruffs glimmer over brother's mercurial mirror, placing midnight victuals in the mouth's devotion. At the end of a song, hunger, the belly's moth flutters towards an unnameable light. Beyond some gentleman's call falls a bright haze, a tale of dusty ice between predictable orbits that kiss the perihelion fire of an unquiet heart. To notice is to hold the self open, holy as a grail, steady as a brush, in silken sweeps across soft veils of Valerian sky. Sister soprano, comet huntress, your amanuensis attention is paid in streaks of gold. What debts do we owe to squander ours so cheaply? Beneath the jealous moon, we count our losses to squares of light. My child reaches out a finger to touch the wet dew, presses a diamond into the corner of my eye. I wrote this next poem for my niece, Vera, who shares the same name as the extraordinary female astronomer and mother, Vera Rubin, who was born in 1928. While the design of the poem is after Oliver Burns' geometry textbook, The Elements of Euclid, diagramming the shape of a triangle, the poem begins with an epigraph about a pivotal moment in Rubin's career. In the mid-1960s, Vera Rubin was granted access to San Diego's prestigious Palomar Observatory, an old boys' club so infamous, astronomers called it the monastery. Though she could use the telescope, Rubin was informed that there was nowhere for her to relieve herself. The facility had no women's restroom. The Book of Vera. To enter a room is to perforate the stark white page, optical precision sharp as the inner edge of arms wide open. I was a girl born to be a shadow. The first point is to begin, to split open the fiber of the field, cut your teeth on curved starlight and lonely work. What does it feel like to be the only, where none before you came? The second is to pivot, steady the blade as far as you can go. They will keep telling you not to go there, that the room has no room. Notice how the doors are spelled, how distant. How did you do it with 4 moons in your orbit? Their little bodies call you by your other name, Mother. A generous garden that spreads forth onto long, wide tables. As the pulp of years give way to the shape of genius, you make a turn, circumnavigate a single point. Your son's gown pours onto the hot glass, tilted towards a spectra of galaxies, burning. Spirals of testimony agree with you about the missing girls. Unseen hands that knead the dough fold the cloth, hold us down, their resistance a safeguard from the senseless spinning out of sight. I slip your triangle into the lining of my inner pocket. Beneath this concentrated scowl, I am a girl searching for the observatory bathroom, echoing the hallway where you firmly pressed onto the door a cutout paper skirt and said, "There you go. Now you have a ladies' room." The naked eye can only see one side of the moon from Earth due to tidal locking. But when scientific innovation led to technology that was able to glimpse the other side, our perspective of the moon expanded. This is a meditation on women's labor that I mapped onto the dark side of the moon. To create this broadside, I turned to NASA's first glimpse of this view as captured by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter seen here. After outlining the craters by hand, I sent production files to my letterpress collaborators at Boxcar Press, where the design was embossed onto paper and the words laid over the surface in platinum silver foil. The embossed layer represents for me the way women's labor undeniably shapes our professional fields, which contrasts with the layer of text representing how little space they take up in the historical record. While many planetary maps often name features after men, I created a map for which all the words are dedicated to one woman. Born in 1912, Dr. Chen-Sheng Wu was a Chinese-American experimental physicist. In 1956, she was approached by colleagues Teng Dao Li and Chen Ning Yang to devise experiments to disprove the law of parity conservation in radioactive decay. Wu placed cobalt-60 into an electromagnetic field at low temperatures and observed that weak interactions among particles were not always symmetrical, overturning a long-held principle of physics. Thanks to the Wu experiment, Li and Yang were awarded the 1957 Nobel Prize in Physics. Wu, however, was not included. Her name, Chen Sheng, translates as courageous hero. The dark side of the moon. Our labor rises from this side of the moon, explosive, precise, prolific, yet glimpsed in libration, not liberation. History's gaze tidally locked on our other half. Across your ridges, mountains of evidence map the fission of your mind and the unmirrored truth of all things. Noble women know how to find each other in the dark, between motes of dust and doubt. Pay no mind to stares that care only to caress the surface. Some of us teach our daughters to hang red lanterns at the ends of their limbs, wonder where they wander in the cold cobalt night. In weak interactions between particles or men, you proved more than anyone how symmetry is violated. In your shadow, my sleep breaks. Fields of glass-wing butterflies shatter the myopic sky. Invisible, in plain sight, flying straight into this eye. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all three of our readers. Monica, that was beautiful. Um, it's so wonderful to get to listen look and engage. I mean, we have so many modes of engagement, even because we're on Zoom. So this is really wonderful. Thank you to all three of you. We're going to transition into the Q&A portion of our conversation. Um, please do use the Q&A function if you haven't already. And I'm going to start with a question for all three of our panelists, which is that I think tonight's readings have all given us an opportunity to think about the connection between art we make in the present and then these various artistic, familial lineages that are underpinning the work that we carry into the present moment of creation. And I want to invite each of you just to talk a bit about your influences. So, or the Emily Dickinson Museum, but it doesn't have to be Emily Dickinson. Um, in the literary arts and beyond, what are some artistic lineages that you feel you're carrying with you into your practice today? Anyone can feel free to unmute and jump in.
I can begin. I think that for me, like looking backwards, like women poets have been so important because thinking of the ways in which women's voices are historically silenced. So even someone like Dickinson, her intentions and her commitment to a singular vision, her inventiveness, her willingness to uh, produce art on her own terms is incredibly inspiring. But so Sylvia Plath for her metaphors and her brilliant kind of image making, Elizabeth Bishop for the ways in which she engaged with such precision with science and place. But then in particularly, I think for me also Asian American poets and writers, because I think for the longest time, I was very interested in being a poet and being a writer, but I didn't have a sense of models being available to articulate my experience. I didn't see myself mirrored so often on the page. So when the earliest kinds of Asian American anthologies came out and I started reading them, for me to hear those voices or hear experiences that were mirrored back something of my own or were adjacent or even just had that sense of diasporic possibility, that was incredibly huge for me as a writer.
I would say I definitely have lineages that are often at intersections of different practices. Of course, Teresa Hak-Kyung-cha as someone who is, an artist and avant-garde poet, but also, many text-based artists like Zhu Bing, for whom, language is, a primary medium of his visual artwork. And, but also, in thinking about, many visual poets in history, particularly coming out of the Fluxus era, who, often, again, intersected with artists, composers, performance, and were willing to find new spaces for their expressions, whether it was creating their own bookstore collectives, galleries that published, to founding their own presses, always interested in overlaps of like book arts and conceptual art and literary experimentation. So I would say for sure, and also too, I mean, I feel lucky to be making work in these last, 15, 20 years where you have seen such a blossoming of, interdisciplinary practice in poetry, whether it's Claudia Rankin or Anne Carson, to Douglas Kearney. But also, in like the spaces of, letterpress, I've been able to be in conversation with, legendary typographer poets like Philip Gallo, and also, admiring the work of, letterpress artists like Amos Kennedy and Ben Blount, who again bring a lot of, very, personal perspective to, what the letterpress space can be in terms of expression. So it's a really exciting time to be making this kind of work.
One plus everything. I love all of your influences, Lee and Monica. So just hold space for that. But I did want to mention, as I teach poetry at an MFA program at Antioch University. So it's a mentorship model. So part of my thinking was about I have a student who's asking questions about form. And people often will say that the mother and father of American poetry are Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, who are quite innovative in terms of form. And so I think of the American impulse as being an American impulse as being very forward thinking. So if I'm going to name it, and I saw a question in the chat about a favorite Emily Dickinson work. And the work that I would like to highlight is I used to intern at New Directions, and they had this beautiful book called uh, The Gorgeous Nothings, and it's Emily Dickinson's envelope poems where she would write on envelopes. And so a lot of people say, well, her punctuation is so innovative. Her ways of working through text in those ways are so innovative. So I think I'm constantly straining to look at for my new influences. Right now I'm reading a book that just came out this year. It's by Fargo Nissim Tabaki, and it's called Terror Counter. And so I'm just looking always to see where people are moving into the future, as well as, like past poets who are thinking about the future. And that's something I'm looking for all the time.
Thank you to all three of you. Those were such great recommendations and insights. I love Fargo's work as well, Cathy. Um, and we have a question in the chat that I want to bring together with another question to be mindful of time, which is about the role of representation, a very big word, in your poetry. And each of you in different ways are engaging the intersection of narrative and historical research, whether that be autoethnographic or personal or truly archival. Um, and then also lyric invention and character and imagination. And I think when it comes to the question of who and what are we representing in our work, these two spheres are both relevant. So I'm wondering how you think about representation, truth, imagination in poetry. It's a huge question, but if any of these words are generative, please pick up on them. Let me know.
I'll piggyback a little bit off of what Lee was talking about with regard to feeling that poetic drive, but not seeing let's imagine one's family stories or one's own stories on the shelf. And so another set of poets that I would say are majorly influential to me are my parents. They don't self-identify as poets, but they are very beautiful storytellers. And so you can understand, you can see in my poems, because it's in my father's voice, my mother's voice, my grandmother's voice, that I derive a lot of my poetry from the stories of our lives. And so there is, for me, the strong desire to do that, but also the understanding that I don't have to do it alone. I am among other people writing about the Vietnam War from their perspectives. And so we're having a beautiful conversation together. So for me, it's not about having this to force forward this singular set of representation, but to participate in a larger conversation that is burgeoning and will continue on. And so I think that when I was young, it was absent from the bookshelves. And now that I'm growing up as a poet among other Asian American or Viet diasporic or refugee And there's so many ways to identify along other people, women or, people interested in family archive or visuals. There's just many different aesthetic and identity based or sonic based. There's not one way to think about what representation means, but I feel like I get to be in conversation with so many people who are doing this important work, looking into the future. And I think of, as we are living through very difficult times. I'm also thinking about the ways that poetry interacts internationally with action and movement. So that's also where I am.
I too feel that representation is not a monolith, and that's the beauty or the possibility of representation. And for me, when I talk about poems with my students, I always like to think about a poem as being a site of possibilities, so aesthetic possibilities or possibilities for ways in which we think about language as material art form, or possibilities for articulating a point of view, or even imagining a point of view, or remembering a history, or recuperating a history that is lost or unvoiced. So, I mean, for me, I like to really think about what is that possibility that's moving outward or lifting outward from the page as a way of the poem being in the world.
I love this question so much. And I think, in terms of representation, I guess, what I like about visual poetry is that I am always curious about the things that are like just out of sight, right? Like, or, like hidden aspects of, particularly these women's lives. A lot of time their labor, right, being unseen or unrecognized, for example, and how visual poetry is a way of a form of play and experimentation that helps us maybe to interrogate, like this, what is this collective gaze and what are some new ways of seeing or expanding, our gaze, so that it can hold more and, and finding different ways to see each other. And so, and again, yeah, it's just, and I think using, these kinds of forms and the sort of alchemy of text and image allows me to help even notice my own like blind spots, if you will, right? But yeah, I think always coming back to, that layer, the layer of hidden stories beneath the surface. I think that's what visual poetry allows me to explore.
Thank you. We could go on and on. I think there's so many ways to answer and talk about this question. But we're coming right up on the end of our program. So I want to thank each of these poets. Thank you so much, Monica, Lee, and Cathy. And also thank you to tonight's listeners. I mean, it's so wonderful to even just get to glance through the chat and see all the amazing connections being made here. We'll be back with our final phosphorescence reading of the season next month. It's a special Tell It Slant Poetry Festival edition with Livia Menigan, Meg Day, and Rajiv Mohabir. And that's also going to be the 13th annual 2025 Tell It Slant Poetry Festival month. So this September 15th through 21st. And that's a full week of in-person, online, and hybrid poetry events. It includes workshops, panels, the marathon reading of all 1,789 Dickinson poems that we know of, and an open mic. And you definitely won't want to miss the festival headliner reading this year, which features poets Terrence Hayes and Kristen Hill. So please head to our website. It'll be linked in the chat to see the lineup and register if you haven't already. Festival access is free. To learn about these and all of our other events, to subscribe to the museum's monthly newsletter, or to make a donation to the museum in support of free programs like this one, please visit emilydickinsonmuseum.org. And with that, just deepest thanks and gratitude to all of you. I think it's so special to get to spend an evening depending on where you are time-wise for everyone on the Zoom together in the spirit of poetry. So thank you to our poets, to our audience, and good night to everyone.